Welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerdist Dave, and today I am joined by Andrew Cawood. How are you doing today, sir?
Good man, how are you?
I'm doing good. Happy to have you on. It's been a little while, and we've just been catching up and chatting here and discussing how many South Africans
Yeah,
are in RPGs because that's where you're a transplant to Canada from South Africa,
yeah,
which is cool because the guys that I would talk to about playing, they're like, we had like one of the three books and like had to figure out how to make the game from that, So I like hearing those like kind of like odd stories about people that had to really work hard to get into the hobby for some reason.
yeah. It's a long way away, even in our modern world. And back then, like you say, I actually moved to Canada around the time, not long after D&D had started. So, and it was more because I was in a smaller city here that back then it was hard to get into the game, hard to get groups of people together. Obviously, no internet. And even I remember like to get miniatures, you were lucky if you found a box set with maybe, 10 or 12 miniatures. So it was very different for sure.
Yeah, I mean, even in the states where that stuff was born, it wasn't prominent, and if and then we had our own obstacles with it. But I couldn't like my big thing is like, well, we didn't have game stores, and then you guys are like, well, hold my beer. We just didn't have stores, or this didn't exist here.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember Dragon magazine coming. I don't even think it came every month. It was like every 2 or 3 months, Dragon magazine would come and
Oh,
um,
nice.
change your life with all these new resources. Which back then, I mean, I remember like Cavalier and Monk and things like that, and weren't in the books.
I think I think like second edition Monk came. That's when we got Monk, and
Yeah,
Cavalier ended up in like the Unarthur Canna book, but they probably did appear first in a Dragon magazine.
yeah.
So what are you working on nowadays? I mean, you've got, as far as I know, and I could be wrong here. Correct me. I'm sure you will. You've got like the Urban Monster book. You have the Feywild Monster book, and then you also have the Underdark Monster book as well. What else is in the works?
Yeah, so we have the monster series, as you said. So we did Feyland, which is the background, right? That's here for the Zoom chat. We did the Underworld book. So those two monster books, which are really, they're more campaign books because they have a lot more resources than just the monsters. So the new one is the City book, as you said, which should be out. It should be going to the PDF should be ready for the Kickstarter people very shortly in September. And then the PDF and printed versions for everybody else, hopefully um, October, maybe early November. And other than that series, we make a lot of DM handbooks and our World of Mirror setting, of course, which we're going to do a big update for next year. And then also adventures on all these things are on our site and on Drive-Through and or DM's Guild. But the City book is the thing we're finalizing. We're literally on the last image, and there'll be a little bit of editing, final editing, and then it's done.
And you guys have Travis Hancock. Is it Hancock? I believe
Hanson.
Hanson. Travis Hanson does your art, and that is what really made those books stand out to me. Because he's got an awesome web comic, and we've even had him on the live chat before. But I think his stuff is fantastic.
Yeah, he's incredibly prolific. The first time I ever saw his art, the first thing I thought, and the art is behind me again on the background. Right away I thought a monster book. We have to do a monster book.
Yeah.
I got a hold of him, and it just so happens we're around the same age. We're both stay-at-home dads with our daughters right now. We're both on the West Coast. He's in California. I'm up in British Columbia, in Vancouver, and our sensibilities, like what we want to present, and our goals are the same. We both want to kind of a balance. We're not really into the horror gore theme. We like bringing fun. I know it's a game. It's a shock these days.
Yeah.
I see some people are so heavy about this game. It's a game. It's fun. So we like to bring fun and some humor, into the game, and his art is perfect for that.
Yeah, that definitely nails it. So, how's your gaming going nowadays? You know, during everything that's going on in the world, the same, less, more?
Definitely a bit more as everyone's at home. We didn't have a hard lockdown up here, but most people were at home, and our group started gaming over Zoom almost immediately. And we miss, normally we'd miss a weekend here or there, even, especially for holidays, for example. But with the current situation, most of my group are like, we know it's a holiday weekend, but
Yeah.
please, can we have a game this weekend? So definitely more. Yeah, and it's funny, it hasn't changed too much because I'm not really into the virtual tabletop. That might change in the future. But right now, what I do is I set up the table like I normally would with the maps and minis, and I aim the webcam on the table. And then if I'm doing more Theater of the Mind stuff, I aim the camera at myself. But in general, the setup's the same. And I like actually having real books and real maps and real miniatures as opposed to just the screen.
Yeah.
And I get to see everybody's faces, right? I know on some of those platforms, people's faces are about this big.
Yeah.
So, and I really want to, I'm the kind of DM, I like to sit and listen and work off the players. So yeah, we've been doing more.
Yeah, I think we're doing more too, but it's like more because other people are available more. So it's, and like you said, like it's a holiday weekend. I forget what was the last holiday weekend that we had a game during, and I was like, oh, it's the holiday, and then I was like, oh, but does it really matter? So
Yeah.
It might have been like 4th of July or something. Yeah, so we generally have been doing mostly just Zoom and Theater of the Mind.
Mm-hmm.
The games that I run suffer very little from that because I don't use terrain, and I've only really used minis for complex combats, and then even then it's like I'll throw out a bunch of minis and they're not even what they're supposed to be. I feel like these watch guys here, they're actually lizard men or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
You borrow your kid's toy collection.
Yeah, you go.
Yeah.
Although now, back in the day, that would have worked better. Now they're a little old for that.
Yeah.
It'll be all Funko Pops.
Yeah. My kid is just getting into it. She's pretty young, and she wants to know the summary of what happened in the game, and she wants to know what miniatures are out, and she pushes her own toys onto the table when I'm doing the setup.
She's trying to sneak some new monsters in, huh?
Yeah. And I'm not really into the frozen characters in the game, so.
Yeah. Had to put the kibosh on that.
Yeah, exactly.
She like playing with the minis in the terrain.
Yeah, she loves it. She's really into storytelling, like most kids are into playing.
Yeah.
And she wants to know before the game starts, afterwards, what happened. My wife doesn't play yet, but she promised that once my daughter is old enough, that we'll do a family campaign.
Okay.
So that'll be interesting because I have a feeling when she starts playing, she might not stop.
Does she have an addictive personality?
She really, she commits fully to what she does for sure.
Yeah.
And she always wants to do it the right way. So, it's an interesting balance because I'm definitely much more right brain and she is definitely the left brain. So yeah, it's interesting.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it took like, I don't know, I've been with my wife since I was 18. I just turned 45 this year, and I want to just say over the last year or two, she started gaming, so it's never too late. It can happen.
Yeah, for sure. I actually took a huge break too. I played first edition. I probably started around, it's hard to remember exactly, I think 79 maybe.
Yeah.
And then I was a player, and then I really quickly decided I wanted to run games. So probably around 80, I was a DM, and then I quit in high school after sports and girls took over. So probably 86, I stopped playing. So around the time like Forgotten Realms was coming out, and definitely before second edition. And then I actually never thought about the game, but later I became a teacher and a storyteller. And then just in the fifth edition playtest, I read Of Dice and Men, that book by David Ewald.
Okay.
About the history of D&D. I read it on holiday actually in the States. And I was like, what? Why did I ever stop playing this game? And I'd been playing Skyrim. I wasn't really into video games that much, but I was playing Skyrim. And I thought with the internet, suddenly it's easier to get a hold of people. And probably 2 weeks later, I played a Sunday night game running for a group that I didn't know anyone, being the DM. And it was like I never stopped DMing, and I've played almost every Sunday since.
Oh, wow, that's crazy. So you jumped right back in and just started running a game.
Yeah, and I did, a stranger's house. I actually brought one player into the game that night, but he didn't know any of the other people.
Yeah.
And they had the whole setup. They had the screen and the battle mat and a massive amount of miniatures. And I remember one of the reasons I did it was because they provided food. They had one of the people was like a really good cook and had nice dinner and homemade desserts. Yeah, so in some way that's what brought me back to the game.
I totally feel that. I'm very food motivated. I always say I'm like a dog, but like a stupid one of the ones that'll eat themselves to death if you just keep the food in front of them.
Yeah.
That's a super cool story to come back into it after all those years and jump right back into the DM's chair. And now you're making products for the game and some really cool stuff, to boot. Our group had just stayed together since I don't even know. Like my younger brother was in our group and he was 16 when we started. He's 8 years younger than me.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was in my early 20s, and like we played with that group solid for like 5 years, and it was like kind of like off and on, like for over the next like 20 or so.
Wow.
But it's I was just thinking though, like you coming back into the hobby with fifth from first edition, I feel like that's an easy transition because a lot of the sensibilities of how you run the game in 5e has their roots in first and second.
Yeah, it's very, very true. I came back and like you say, the feel of the game, the focus on storytelling again, I guess that sort of the game went away from that a little bit, it sounds like. I don't know anything about second, third, 3.5, 4, and maybe it's good. I don't know. But yeah, it wasn't that different. Like the differences are, for me, that I notice are that the characters are tougher, and that the game is not as strategic. And we talked about this when I was on here 2 years ago. And I kind of have to teach my group, if I want a game like that, to be more strategic. But in many ways, there's a lot of similarities. Like I still play a lot of the old adventures. We do campaigns in our World of Mir, but we also do a fair bit of Greyhawk. And I use the old adventures, like we just did the Saltmarsh series. And last year I did the Slavers series. And those series, it's really easy to convert to 5th edition.
Have you gone back? I guess you're looking at the adventures. Have you gone back and looked at the 1st edition rule set, that much and kind of like compared it?
Not too much. I'm just starting to, because I've started to collect. I used to have all those books, right? And in the late 80s, early 90s, for sort of the Gen Xers out there, when we came out of high school, there were no jobs. When we came out of university, there were no jobs. So back then I sold all that stuff because I had no money. So now I'm collecting it and I'm starting to look through it. I'm also interested in doing some sci-fi at one point. So I just got the Star Frontier stuff recently. So I've started to look through that old TSR books.
Yeah.
It'll probably be this fall, probably be a fall and winter project.
So, as in you want to run Star Frontiers, or are you thinking about converting some stuff for 5e?
I'm thinking about making a new RPG, something that is pretty rules light. I'm not really into heavy mechanics. Yeah, and so I'm looking at that. There's things about Traveler I liked, but the only RPG I played other than D&D was Star Frontiers.
Okay.
And there's some good things about that system, some simple things. But yeah, I'm starting to look at that.
Psycho gliding monkeys.
Yeah, yeah. And I know Travis, who has worked with us a lot on our projects, we're looking at doing a bunch of things in the future, and one of them is a sci-fi RPG. Yeah, I'm looking at making our own system for sure.
So are you thinking sci-fi or science fantasy?
Sci-fi. Yeah, I kind of like to keep those worlds separate.
Yeah.
It was pretty fun back in the day. The Barrier Peaks module was kind of cool. But in general, I like classic fantasy and I like classic science fiction. I really like the Aliens world building, that series of movies. And a movie like Outland. I don't know if you remember that one. It was Sean Connery. He's in a mining colony.
Oh yeah, like the name is not triggering, but I do vaguely remember the movie. I remember him in a spacesuit. So.
Yeah. It's kind of like a lot of people compare it to High Noon in space.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a little bit Firefly. It's kind of a science fiction Western. So we'll have to see where that goes, but we're definitely looking at that as a future project.
Nice. I'm curious to see what you guys come up with. I'm definitely all for rules light. The older I get, the less rules I want.
Same here.
Yeah, we're getting ready to do another game, and we're trying to figure out who's going to run next, and so I just pitched them on a kind of like a science fantasy post-apocalyptic, Flash Gordon meets Thundar the Barbarian kind of scenario.
Right. Is there a system that you've played before, a science fiction system like Traveler or Starfinder?
I have played Starfinder. I've played back in the day. We did play a little bit of Star Frontier as well. Mm-hmm. But most of the games that I've played that we've done anything close to that is more like generic systems that we've used. That's why I was a little curious why you went with Star Frontiers. Instead of something maybe a little bit more modern to check out and see what was going on.
Yeah, well, like I say, I stopped playing RPGs around '86. Yeah. So I have a huge gap there to sort of. I've got some interesting research to do for sure.
So, Matt wants to know: do you feel this fantasy genre is too saturated right now? There is a lot of stuff out there right now.
I don't feel that. No, there's more and more people playing the game, I think, every day, and especially now with people at home more. No, I think fantasy still has tons of room to grow. But for ourselves, I think it'll be interesting to branch out into other areas. When I started the company, I originally didn't think only of RPGs. I was thinking of other types of literature and gaming as well. So sci-fi is probably the next thing that we would do. But my first love for sure is fantasy, and our focus mostly is fantasy. We have plans to keep doing these monster books for a while. I have at least 7 other ideas for the, and especially now that Travis and I have worked on this narrative that gets basically a narrative that merges with the monster book. So the first, the Feyland one was mostly a monster book with a few resources, and the lore is interspersed in the book. Underworld, people wanted more of a campaign book. So we built in these stories of conflicts between the different species and this creature that is spreading out spores throughout the Underdark and infecting people and basically and creatures and changing them over to their alignment. And now the city book, we did this theme with sins and virtues. So each of the districts of the city is tied into a sin and a virtue, and they're actual monsters. So you're going to get to play like pride and humility and greed and And I like the old AD&D thing about deities being quite powerful, but you can still kill them. And you can still interact with them in certain states. So these virtues and sins, you can actually interact with them as well.
I like that from the angle too of like what happens if like, you know, if this thing leaves the world, like, you know, it's a terrible thing, right? But so you're doing good by getting rid of it, but then you find out that it actually had a purpose and there's a reason why it existed. What it, you know, and maybe something that fills the void is worse.
Exactly. Or is it more of a role and another head just replaces it?
Yeah.
You know, it's like a Hydra, another head just comes up. And we've made it really open-ended. I like to give the DM a lot of choice. So you could have a mega city with all of these sins and virtues and all these districts in the city, or you could have just two of them fighting over a city themselves, like, humility and pride fighting over a city, or lust and chastity. Or you could have a story where it's mostly about their minions and they're in the background. That's probably a more realistic way to start for most games. But it definitely adds a lot more. And the next book we're going to do is going to have another built-in narrative. So people can choose the monsters if they want, and then they can also have a built-in campaign ready to go.
Yeah, I know with the Feylands, like there was a lot of lore in there, so it wasn't just like here's a monster, but like here's these interesting hooks and things that go with that monster that you can, you know, use for your game.
For sure, yeah, and you know, the books develop in the look. We're really lucky to have Gordon McAlpin right now, this new layout guy who did art direction for our book as well. In the first two books, we really just presented Travis with a book and we said, here's the spot, now put in, you know, there's the place for your art. But this time, Gordon and Travis are working in tandem. So the pictures are going to be much more dynamic, and Travis was able to illustrate for the space, specific spaces that are available. And it's going to look much more dynamic. The layout will be a lot better. Yeah, and I just did another project with Gordon as well, the Feats Don't Fail Me Now book on the DM's Guild, with a whole bunch of ridiculous feats for 5th edition, which some of them turn out actually to be useful as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we've got a few things going on the go there.
Nice. So, VK Dan wants to know, do you prefer 1E or 5E?
Well, I love the 5E, the system, how it moves so smoothly, and it really helps you in storytelling, I think, because that can be the focus. But as far as content, like adventures, I almost always go back to 1st edition. So I like the content more of 1st edition, and I like the mechanics more of 5th edition.
Yeah, you know, I feel like it just goes back to the fact that, you know, oftentimes gamers don't make great business people. So during 1E, they just made all the stuff they wanted to make, and maybe they weren't thinking about, well, is this us making for a profitable company or not? So they would just put out more and more stuff. Where now, like, companies are really looking at, well, what makes sense to put out? You know, what is going to let us keep the lights on and make cool stuff?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because as you say, in 5th edition, they just churned out adventures, right? But I really like, I keep getting drawn back to those as being great stories, where the newer stuff, not as much. Although I did like they have that naval sea mechanics section in the Saltmarsh book. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, you know, I found like so we don't run pre-written adventures pretty much ever, but like they do manage to keep including things that we find useful in all the adventures that they have been putting out, and they explore different parts of the game. But yeah, and the other thing too is like a big difference between earlier editions and the adventures and supplements they would put out. They were smaller, right? Unless you're talking about like a box set. Compared to now, it's this book that's going to take you through at least 10 levels of play, which is a huge difference. Like, because sometimes maybe you just want little chunks to drop in your game. You don't want it to be your whole entire game.
Yeah, it's very true. They're pretty dense. I haven't run too much of them, and the ones that I have, like I did Strahd, and I took out a lot. For me, I felt there was just so much stuff in there, so many factions, and the story's kind of going all over the place. But the core of it, the core of it really is very much Ravenloft, to be blunt. But yeah, it's they are dense, and the original adventures, you might get a level or 2 levels or something. You're right. A lot of those were very, very short.
So I felt like there was more, like what you were saying. I go back. I could see why someone would want to go back, and also like there was also a lot of really cool resources that were super specific that I don't think we'll ever see again from official content anyway, like the Sea Devil book or the Eye Tyrant book. That series was amazing, but I can't imagine that would be a particularly great seller. It's super niche. It's DM and then this specific thing.
Yeah.
I'm gonna jump into the chat. Curse of Sebs, does this affect creation or process, and how do you not keep spiraling and building? I think wait a minute, let me see. Sorry. So there's something really impressive about how the monsters fit the setting and narrative so well, but also have so much application in other settings. Does this affect your creation or process, and how do you not keep spiraling and building?
I think what he's saying, and I know Curse of Seb, so hey man, I think what he's saying is that even though we've made setting books with monsters, we try to have creatures that you can use in many different ways. And that's true with the new city book for sure as well. And so we do think about that. Is the monster really, really specific to this setting? So we try to have creatures that can be used in many different ways. And it is always a challenge to decide when is it finished. Yeah. As far as the bio of the monster, we don't want to do too much, because I think a lot of that ends up being fluff, in my opinion. As a DM, I think practically you just want to know what can this monster do, have a bit of a story about them. But too much of that, I'm not going to read it as a DM, and most people I know who are game masters, they're not going to read it. And a lot of people grab the book quickly when they're in the game and they're holding the book. And you don't want a lot of information there, I think. I think you want to know the key points. So that helps in the creation and making sure that we're not going on and on and on about the creatures and deciding their lore and deciding their mechanics.
So Sai wants to know, how do you feel about 5e rules being used for multiple settings like Cyberpunk with Carbon 2185 and New Hellboy that is up on KS Kickstarter right now? I didn't realize that was there. That was an option on Kickstarter.
I think it's great. I think people should do what they want to do. All the power to them. I know the guys who did the Cyberpunk game, the people who did the Cyberpunk game, I'll correct my old school language. I think it's great. When we update our World of Mir next year, you're going to see we've already put out 3 of the 9 continents. We're going to do all the rest of them. And you'll see that Mir also has a lot of different elements to it and different settings as well. Yeah, I think if you want to use 5e rules for a new game, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of stuff that people are doing with it. Superheroes, science fiction, post-apocalyptic. I mean, we used to get this question all the time on our channel. How do I play this? And usually my answer is just like, I don't know. That game already exists. You can just go play that game a lot of times. I mean, and it's a matter of preference. And I also totally get people not wanting to learn a new rule set.
For sure.
But at the same time, I feel like D&D does D&D really well, and when you start branching out, not so much. Yeah, because it's the class system, right? I don't feel like the class system is a good fit for every genre and every type of storytelling.
Yeah, there's lots of different philosophies for sure. Like Traveler has a totally different system. Yeah, there's skill systems, class systems. Yeah, I think, and I get your point. There are times where you wonder why you changing the game entirely
Yeah.
when you can just go play another game. And that really applies to D&D right now too. There's some people who want to change it into a game that looks nothing like D&D. I know there's people who even want to change the word Dungeon Master because they think it's a hierarchical name.
Yeah.
And people who don't want evil humanoids, people who don't want to have any violence in the game because they say that's colonialist or something.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, like, you can play the game however you want. It doesn't need to change at that high level, because you can take it and make it whatever your friends want to play. And I mean, Jeremy Crawford is always answering sage advices and essentially saying that, like, here's the rules, here's what we intended, do what you want.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, people can choose, but there are more people these days who like to tell other people what they should be doing, for sure. It's interesting.
And, the term Dungeon Master comes from, well, basically everything you did was in a dungeon. You had this one person that ran the dungeon. Yeah. They were kind of in charge of the dungeon.
Yeah.
So, I think people read a little deeper into things than is actually there sometimes.
Well, and they often people project their own stuff onto the world, So I think it's kind of a maturity, and if you got to look at yourself first, and also, like I said earlier, it's a game. Yes. Like people that I know who don't know the game, when they see my group playing, they say it just looks like you guys are hanging out at the table laughing for 4 hours.
And that's what it should be. Like, yeah. Like, I've had this weird experience with people online and asking questions, and the way they ask the questions and the questions they ask brings me back to a question of, like, who are you playing the game with? Like, when I have always thought of this game, I think about something I do with my friends. So from that perspective, the questions become really odd, because they're very they tend to be very, like, adversarial, and, like, how do I make this person do that? And, like, no, this is just the thing we do. Like, this has always just been the thing I do for a social thing, right? I get together with my friends. We tell stories. We make stupid jokes. We act like idiots. We eat pizza. For us, it's never been that deep. I mean, like, we've gotten more narrative driven, and the game has changed somewhat, but yeah, it's always been a social event for us.
Yeah, and that's us too. That is the number one reason we're doing it. One of my players said it's like our family Sunday night dinner.
So Joe wants to know, do you have any cool new dragons? Do you guys plan on doing a dragon book?
Well, I love dragons. I love everything about classic fantasy. There definitely will be dragons, not in the city book, because for me, these things have to make sense to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So in the city book is really a classic medieval kind of setting. So to me, it wouldn't make much sense to have a dragon or a giant walking around the streets. Although when you see the book, you'll see there might be versions of that. But the next book will take a totally different direction, and it will have more monsters. Like, obviously the city book had to have a certain amount of humanoids. But the next book, there definitely will be. I already have 3 dragons for the next book. And it's a really big challenge, because trying to think of something new that hasn't been done with dragons is tough. Probably my favorite one we've done so far is the Dream Dragon in Feyland. And that one actually breathes out hallucinatory terrain, basically like the spell in some ways. And the party is now trapped in that magical terrain. And to get out of the terrain, they have to kill the dragon.
We I definitely get that too, and especially like I feel like since 5e's come out, there's been a plethora of just dragon books as well.
For
And so,
sure.
how do you put your own spin on it? Although, in all honesty, I wouldn't mind seeing Travis draw a book of dragons, in his style to see how they come out. Maybe that's what you need. You need to turn him loose and have him draw a bunch of dragons and then figure out the story behind them.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea. I'm going to write that down. And you know what? If he hears that,
Yeah.
he'll want me to do that for sure.
That and then it's then it also moves the problem onto someone else's plate.
My plate.
Well, no, I feel like it moves it more on his plate because he's got to come up with conceptually the dragon themselves first, and then you can look at it and be like, oh, well, what's the story for this dragon?
Yeah, yeah. It's one of my favorite parts about the job are the calls with Travis when he usually, I have a description from him, and he usually does a sketch, and then I go, that's 99% of the time I'm like, that's amazing. And then sometimes he's like, I'm not sure quite what you mean. And we have these conversations. It's usually in the evening on the West Coast here. And it's just hilarious when my wife hears something where, he's like, how many tentacles does it have? Or
Yeah.
he's like, are you sure you want that? Like, for example, with the sins and virtues, it was a lot of fun deciding what gender or what orientation should this creature have. Should there be one? So for instance, we made gluttony. We decided just to make it into a monster. It was much better to have a monster than have a male version of gluttony or a female version or other versions.
Well, sometimes your monsters have to have genders too, though. So.
Oh, we have done that. We try to play off some stereotypes. So, for example, pride is feminine in our book. And kindness is masculine. So there's a lot of interesting things, but these conversations are so much fun to decide, what the mechanics of the monster are going to be and what they look like. And we really care about the image that we're presenting and the meaning behind it. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So apparently one of your friends is in the chat, Jeremy E. Oh, an
Yeah.
interview with the meanest DM in Canada. Yeah, but it's still like meanest DM in Canada. It's still Canada, right? Where everyone's super nice and polite. So what does that meanest really even mean? Slightly
Yeah,
rude?
I think there's the South African part coming out again. We're pretty, we're a country of rugby players, and we're pretty much straightforward. And the Canadian more gentle sensibility might get ruffled up. I know my players, they always bring backup characters to our game. Let's put it that way.
Not a bad idea, saves time. So Travis wants to know, do you prefer painted or unpainted miniatures?
Oh, I think everyone knows that I'm well known on social media for being the unpainted miniature guy. I always put hashtag stay beautiful. It's funny because back in the 80s, I always painted the miniatures.
Yeah.
Once I started again, maybe I'm just older and lazy, and I'm sure Jeremy is going to say yes, and Travis. But I really like the classic look. It sort of reminds me of those little army men back in the days, the little green army men.
Yeah, yeah.
And at our table, for some reason, the unpainted minis sort of help bring things back to the story. But there is an ongoing debate online because I am, to be honest, a big fan of the really talented people who actually do paint their miniatures, like Michael Mordor, for example, in Scotland. Yeah.
There are a lot of talented people out there.
Amazing.
I am not one of them. So therefore, I was so ecstatic when, in third edition, they launched their pre-painted minis. To me, that was like the best thing ever. And I also just don't enjoy painting them. I know some people love painting minis and it's like therapeutic and they'll just, listen to podcasts or whatever, just spend, days and years just painting away. I'm not one of them. Matter of fact, like at a lot of these conventions, I've been invited to do these mini painting things, and I generally accept them because I like the people. And I
Mhm.
like hanging out with them and talking with them. I just don't like painting the minis, and I'm not very good at it. I, you know, if I had my way, I would just dunk, spray paint maybe.
So you're waiting for one of those machines like in Star Trek just to do it for you.
Well, you know they're getting close. Hero Forge has those,
Yeah.
3D printed colored minis, and they look really good. I mean, they tricked Ted, and he's kind of a mini guy and likes doing that stuff. When they set the prototype out, I had gotten the email, but the stuff went to him, and he's like, and he didn't know that it wasn't painted.
Wow.
So I mean, it wouldn't be like an amazing paint job, but it passes for a paint job.
Wow.
So yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm all about that. That's perfect for people like me who maybe want a custom mini, but also
Yeah.
maybe don't want to paint it.
Yeah, I can see your collection behind you there. Some of your collection for sure.
Yeah, so my collection is a green screen, and it's Ted's collection. I mean, I have some stuff, but not nearly as much as Ted does. And Ted
Wow.
is he's a good painter and good at crafting crafting terrain and stuff like that. That's totally his wheelhouse. Although it becomes a double-edged sword because he started doing more of it. Now the players demand it, so now he's trapped. So Sai wants to know what makes a good GM or DM. That's a very, very broad, extensive topic.
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, I think the basic things I would say, because like you say, Dave, every person is their own person. I would say one of the big things is I see a lot of young GMs who try to play a dungeon master. They see people on Twitch or YouTube who play the role of a dungeon master as opposed to just being themselves. So I would say really, from my point of view, to be yourself is really important. So choose things that you love, choose elements of the game you love, work with things that are your strengths. And personally, also, I like DMs who listen. You can learn so much and you can run so much in the game. You can create so much if you just listen to the players. For example, you can start a story. If you start a story in the stereotypical location of a tavern, your players, once they sit down to a tavern and they already have their characters, just listen. You can have them start a conversation and build off of that. So much of what we do in our weekly game is built off of what my players say and what is obvious that they like. I have a couple of players who just want action as much as possible. So I make sure for those people that there's action. I have a couple of people who really want to be doing exploration, who want really detailed lore, like multi-layered stories. So I'd say, the biggest thing for me is listening to your players.
Yeah, you actually stole my answer. There's a great quote. You have one mouth, two ears, so you should listen twice as much as you talk. And I love just listen to the players, and oftentimes I'll change what I was going to do in a game from what they say, and I do a lot more like improv DMing and less structured planning and writing things out, and I'll just throw out a bunch of plot hooks and see which ones they want to do. And and when they go in a direction, that's what we're doing. That's what they say.
Right.
They've told me what they want to do, through their actions and through how they play the game and talking to each other. A pivotal moment in one of those stream games that we did like 50, 60 sessions, I think, online for the Scarlet Sisterhood, was when they needed to go meet some hags to try and get some ingredients. And one of the players was just like made the throwaway comment of, "Oh, I bet this is going to be like, we're not just going to be able to go buy stuff. It's going to be like a fairy tale type thing." And I was like, "Well, it is now." So
yeah.
So they instead of just going and being quest givers, they end up like that the hags took something from them that they had to give up freely through this ritual. and it
Right.
was something meaningful. Like for one of the characters, it was their connection between them and their riding dog, Monty, and for another one, they had kind of fled their homeland uh, from a betrothal they weren't interested in, and they forgot everything about where they came from. So things like that. And then and it was cool because all the other players like knew the backstory and knew the stuff, and so they got to interact with that. And then like part of the game became, well, how do we undo this, and how do we get back from the hags what they've been taking from people, which totally
Right.
derailed the campaign for a while, but that was fine because that's the game that my players wanted to play.
Right. Yeah, it's so much fun to follow that. And I have one player in particular. She makes the most incredible backstories. So I always know that part of our campaign is going to tie into this amazing story. And right now, one of the campaigns, she decided she had an arch enemy who they grew up basically as friends. And then at one point, there was this incident where they found these magical items, and she took like the sun, and her best friend took the moon, and she became light and her friend became dark. And I ended up, I'm like, okay, well, that's going to be one of the arch villains in this campaign now.
Yeah.
It's going to be her former childhood friend. And, always using the player's backstory, obviously invest them more into the game.
Yeah, I love being able to do stuff like that. So Christopher wants to know how has the pandemic affected your sessions? I've seen your camera set up on Instagram instead of something like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds. How has that worked out?
Well, our group, we're kind of an older group in general, so we weren't sure how the whole virtual game would go. However, we're having way more fun than we thought. It's not the same as being at the table, but it's not too far. Especially since, as you say, the table is set up the same. I have one player who would prefer, I think, to have VTT. But overall, for me, it's always about the story. And I think my group, in the end, it's about the story. And for me, it does actually help setting up the table. I'm going to be a guest DM for North by Northwest in September, this podcast. And I think I might even set up the table a bit, even though I'm going to be doing 100% Theater of the Mind because it's a podcast. I think I might just set up it helps me to see where everything is. And and I can't have all these miniatures to go to waste, or my wife's not going to let me keep buying them.
There you go. She's got to see you playing with your toys.
Yeah, one of my favorite things that happened about maybe a year or two ago was one of my good friends, her husband came by and looked in the miniatures cabinet and said, "Oh, there's way more room in there." So there's more room to fill. So
gotta keep fun. So do you use terrain as well?
The thing about terrain is that our city space is such a premium. It's kind of like Seattle or San Fran. So we live in a condo.
Yeah.
And I don't have space to store too much terrain. And obviously it gets expensive too. But I have started to buy some. And I'm really impressed by, there's a new company, I can't remember their name right now, a UK company who makes cardboard stock buildings. And the art is just amazing.
Yeah.
And it's not as expensive as some of the plastic terrain. So I'm going to start to add that in, but I have to find space. I have to convince my wife to get rid of certain things in the condo.
Yeah.
So that the miniatures and the terrain can move in.
Ted is a big fan of 1985 games. And we've done some sponsorship work with them. But they have this dungeon craft terrain. It's all like paper craft. And so Ted likes to use that combined with scatter a lot of times. And like their buildings and city stuff is kind of cool because you flip it, like it's the rooftops, you flip it over, it has the interior of the building. They have different ones, so you can have different levels to the building, and it's just easy to store because it's it's just paper craft, so it's I mean, it's not as impressive as say Dwarven Forge, but you know it gets the job done. It's easy to store. It's portable. Yeah, you're not trucking around 500 pounds worth of terrain if you go someplace else and you want to set it up.
Yeah, yeah. There are some incredible setups. There's a guy on Instagram, Inked Mage, I think is his handle, and he has the most incredible setup, a massive basement,
Yeah.
huge table, shelves and shelves of Dwarven Forge, and I think the new WizKid stuff. I think it's called Warlock or something.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, and then he's got a lot of things from model trains, like those little trees. And he has the most like spectacular setups that again, you have to have a lot of space for it to be practical. Because like in our game, we change the scene. Again, I want the players to choose what they're doing.
Yeah.
So that you could set up this huge castle, and then the players could be like, you're gonna go walk by and get some equipment at the store, and they never even go to the castle.
I feel the same way as a more of a theater of the mind GM. I'm like, I just look at like these setups and I just envision my players going, yeah, we're gonna be doing something else instead.
Yeah. It's you have to be prepared. I know my players kind of do the Wayne's World thing if I'm changing the scene. And I like to have that ready. So I think to be a good sandbox DM, sometimes you have to have more, it really helps to have a full world. So then you really can be, okay, you guys can choose to go wherever you want. And I mean that 100% in my game. I let my players, sometimes I might give hints or I might lead them in a certain direction, but they can always go wherever they want. So that's probably one of the reasons I made all the DM handbooks. So I'm ready with a lot of options.
I kind of like what Matt Mercer does on Critical Role, where he has the build set up on like a piece of plywood or something, and then like brings it in for a scene. Also, he has a production crew, so that also makes it easier because he can do bigger scenes than most of us can.
Yeah, that would help for sure. Yeah.
So Jeremy E wants to know, I know there are a few projects planned for 2021, but what's the first book that's planned? Is that the next monster book?
Yes. I'm already writing the text for the next monster book. As I said, it's going to go in a different direction from the city. There's going to be a lot more big monsters, monsters, as opposed to sort of NPC types. That would be the first thing we're looking, hopefully the Kickstarter in January or February. And I hope the same team is together. For sure, Travis is on board. And hopefully Gordon McAlpin will be our layout and art director again, and graphics and videos. And then later in the year, we hope to do a World of Mir Kickstart to update the setting and finish it off. And that will probably be June. And then we've got other plans, like I said, in the future, looking towards a sci-fi RPG. And Travis and I have also talked about RPGs for kids. I know yesterday you had BJ Hensley. So I'm a big proponent of RPGs for kids. I really don't understand why the industry has kind of stayed away from that for the most part. Because a lot of the things in the industry really are not age appropriate, and I'm not saying like there can't be a gritty D&D or a gritty RPG, but it's just a huge market, and it's such a good tool for teaching for kids.
I feel like they're moving in that direction with a lot of the more recent stuff. But also you figure like, so one of the things that's happened now, or it's been happening, is now the people that were playing before, they've grown up, they have their own kids, they have their own grandkids. So like maybe now's the time, back in the the first part of the gaming industry, maybe it didn't make sense, but now maybe it will make more sense, and we'll see more of that. But there are a couple like small niche companies that have done it. BJ, she's done some stuff with her company, which is fantastic. Also, Monty Cook Games, they've done No Thank You Evil, which is a great game for kids. It's actually one of the best ones in my opinion, because that game is resource management and it works off using, physical components. So even kids that don't necessarily, they may not be able to count yet, but they can see like a pile of chits growing and shrinking, and they understand what that means. They understand having more or less, and they also understand wanting to conserve them or just not have them go away.
Yeah. Hopefully it starts more. I think Wizards did a good job with the newest version of Dungeon, the board game. And I know that firsthand. I was surprised actually, because my daughter was only 3 when she started playing it. And it was the first board game she understood and the first board game that she was interested in playing again. And it's a really stripped down version for the people who don't know it. Stripped down version of D&D. You just go room to room, fight monsters, get treasure, like a basic dungeon crawl. But it's made perfectly for kids. It's a good family game. So hopefully there's more of that, because I think that it's just such a great game that kids could play. Obviously, the regular D&D, there's things in it that aren't for kids, but you could easily make a lot of good RPGs for kids that would be. I know they did studies when D&D started. There was, of course, some of that kind of moral panic a bit in the 80s, but there were also studies that showed kids who were playing the game, their language arts scores, their English scores, their language scores, and their math scores actually went up. So there's a lot of great things about it for kids.
Well, go figure. Using math and reading makes you better at them. I would love to see them like bring back Hero Quest and just rebrand it as a D&D thing. That game was a lot of fun as a kid. And it's like very, very like D&D light.
Yeah. I know there are people who've done. It'd be nice to see more mainstream stuff like that, as opposed to always going to playing the horror card.
But who knows? Or maybe it's up to Cawood Publishing to step in there and make it happen.
Well, we'll see. And definitely, Travis is interested. He actually had some of his fans, his followers, have come to him and said, "You guys should partner with Cawood Publishing and do it." So we'll take a look. It's influenced our monster books for sure. What people want.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that'd be cool. And it also sounds like you have a lot on your plate as well. The next 7 months. We do, but we're getting better at planning ahead. So, for example, now I'm writing the next monster book, which is the Kickstarter is only going to be in January or February. So the text will be done, at some time in the fall. We'll do a little mini book like we did for the city book. That's totally finished with the layout and art. So that should be ready in December. So we're getting better at planning things. And as my kid gets older, I'm going to have more time to work on it. So the best part of the chat today is your friends just popping in to occasionally troll you. Jeremy E. Cawood is interested in a Frozen RPG, is the rumor.
Well, if you look very carefully in the Feyland book, I took a number of shots at that story. Yes, the reason I have this background actually for Zoom is that behind me, it's my daughter's bedroom, and it's just filled with Frozen art and Frozen posters.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get the Frozen as much. My kids were older when that came out.
Yeah.
So. But, I do have Caillou horror stories.
Oh, God. Oh, that's just wrong.
Yeah, there was way too many
That's just wrong.
Too many years of Caillou. I feel like that was the worst thing any of my kids watched. That kid's voice was just so annoying. It was the worst. He had a big bald head and they put a baseball cap on him. It just kind of made him look like a cancer patient. I'm like, why would you do that to that child? He's supposed to be like four or five, and he had like 2 strands of hair. Yeah. As a former teacher, I can tell you, I got rid of those in all my classrooms. Yeah. All those books were gone. Oh,
Yeah.
well, it wasn't books. It was the cartoon.
Oh, the cartoon. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, at least at the books, you would supply the voice. Although Ted has been known to turn some of those children's stories, shows, books into things for his games.
Wow.
Have you plumbed those depths at all?
No, but I know my 4-year-old is lobbying for a Frozen D&D campaign at home.
Yeah. How's that going?
Well, I think if I get my daughter and wife playing, I might have to do it.
Yeah, they're gonna team up on you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, not only that, our dog and the other. Well, right now, actually, my wife is working in the office. My mother-in-law is here with my daughter, and then there's the two female dogs. So
Yeah,
I'm completely surrounded.
a lot of estrogen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we are up on the hour mark. Final words before we head on out.
I'm just really fortunate and happy that you brought me on again. And people can take a look at our website at World of Myr, MYRR, for the pre-orders of the City book or other 5th edition products.
As always, links are in the description, folks. You can go check them out.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Always fun to talk.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. It's been a great chat. And until next time, stay nerdy.
Take care, guys.